Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can listen live on air or also on iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, nccradio.org, or download the WHPC app to hear all of our award-winning shows. And Herbally Yours has been bringing you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. This show has been broadcasting since 1990, so thank you so much for joining us today. Our guest is Dr. Anna Kelles, Ph.D., and she is an assembly member of the New York 125th District. Dr. Anna earned a dual bachelor's in biology and environmental science in 1997 from Birmingham University, and also spent 4 years in Ecuador promoting sound, nutritional and environmental practices, and working as a high school biology teacher, guiding in the Amazon and designing a study abroad program. She then earned a PhD in nutritional epidemiology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and she currently serves as New York Assembly member representing the 125th District. And we're going to talk today about some of her projects. She has been a staunch champion of criminal justice reform, housing affordability and accessibility, climate change solutions, and natural resource preservation. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Kelles.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And I'll call you Dr. Anna, if that's okay.
Of course, of course.
So we know each other in another incarnation of yours.
Absolutely. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Time flies. And you were involved with running a wonderful education program, teaching doctors about nutrition. So you were bringing that natural information into more of an academic setting. What led you to seek an assembly member seat?
That is a long and windy road. I told someone recently when I was in 10th grade, I remember distinctly having the thought that I had no idea who I wanted to be when I grew up, but I knew I didn't want a desk job and I didn't want to be a politician. And I have a desk job and I'm a politician. So you always have to be careful. But so after... So you know me in the context of being the director of the master's program of clinical nutrition at the chiropractic college near here. And after that, or during that time, I got very involved in environmental advocacy locally, including work to prevent the significant expansion of natural gas storage in the old salt mines under Seneca Lake. And that led me to connections with people who were working in Ithaca to try and prevent the tear down of the old Tompkins County Library and rebuilding it with a brand new rebuild or new build. There was one project that had been proposed for that development or redevelopment site that was an adaptive reuse. So it would have retained about 3,000 tons of steel and concrete of the old building and rebuilt a new building. And I ended up spending years doing a deep dive into zoning, urban development, and its impact on human health, environmental health. And that led me into a tremendous amount of community organizing, galvanized thousands of people to write letters to the county, built a neighborhood listserv, a neighborhood organization, spent 2 years going to meetings. And that's actually what led to several legislators reaching out to me when my county legislator at the time stepped down for health reasons to run for that seat, which I did actually in response to the final decision for that building site, where it came down to a split and there was a tie vote that person chose the tear down and the new building rather than the adaptive reuse, even though the community and even the city of Ithaca had clearly publicly come out in support of the adaptive reuse. And I saw for the first time, how important it was to have a representative government that truly listen to constituents.
So if there was another person, like if you were on at that time, that building would have been saved.
Right, exactly. And that was, it was one of those soul moments where you say, I never thought about doing this, but I actually now see that I can use my background as a researcher to really study deeply issues that are raised and make decisions not based on personal relationships or anecdotes, but data. And so I ran for that seat for that special election and won. And I was a county legislator for about 5 years, and working 5 jobs. One of them being this, and had to work the other jobs because the pay as a county legislator was so small. Local government elected officials really, do not make a living wage in any way.
No, it's almost more volunteer.
Which it shouldn't be, because of course, when you have when the pay is too low and you've essentially got a volunteer elected body, you are guaranteeing that it will not be representative of anyone who is lower income. When of course we've got a lot of structural racism in our society, which means that Black and brown people tend to be lower income. So we're less likely to have a diverse representative body. We're less likely to have people who are renters. We're more likely to have people who are all homeowners, who are wealthier, who are older, who are retired. So not a lot of diversity. So that was actually something that I fought for when I was a county legislator, but I knew in my head I was working myself too much and knew it was sort of up or out. And the state seat opened up, and I also, could see that it really at the state level is where you can make deep, profound, structural, fundamental changes with legislation. At the local level, it's a bit more administrative. You can make changes for sure, but they're smaller. The impact is smaller. And my head was full of so many ideas after 5 years of seeing problems, in the system and in the community. So I ran for office in 2020 as an epidemiologist, trained epidemiologist running in an epidemic, which was a surreal experience. But I won that primary and have been the New York State elected assembly member since I started January 1st, 2021. And it's been quite an adventure since then. So very long, windy story of how I got here. But
well, it's almost like a natural path that was opened for you. Let me ask you this. I noticed that you are called an assembly member, but I am remembering people being called an assembly man or an assembly woman. Did they specifically change that to a more inclusive term?
So every elected official can choose how they want to be referred to. I'm very adamant about being referred to as an assembly member. And in fact, I passed a piece of legislation this session that would require that all legislation written from now on and all new laws enacted have to be gender neutral. No longer using binary he or she. They have to use they, them. People's instinct is to say, well, yeah, fine, but that's not grammatical. In fact, actually, that is completely not true. And I did a long debate on the floor the APA styles, AP styles, the MLA styles. These are all guidelines for how to, write grammatically correctly and cite things correctly when you are writing and publishing. All of them have endorsed using they, them in the singular, using he, she when someone particularly prefers that as an individual, but otherwise using gender-neutral terms, as did the Webster dictionary. And I read the section of the Webster dictionary that specifically talks about this. And it was sort of tickled by the section that describes those that believe that they, them, is grammatically incorrect, are inherently conservative and, don't understand the history of they, them. And then there's a long paragraph that I read from the American Board Association, lawyers, that also has come out endorsing the use of they, them as the singular. And there's a paragraph that they go in depth describing how they, them has been used in the singular since the, documented back to the 1300s, from Chaucer on. It was very wonderful, all the citations. So it was actually old or new,
all things new are old again, or not all things old are new
right,
again.
Exactly. And in truth, they, them is the modern thou, and that's biblical. So I think that it is something that we will get used to, and people who are not used to it, are not familiar or comfortable with it now, a couple of years from now when it is the norm, they will be used to it. We're waiting for the governor, of course, to sign it and make it law.
Well, when I saw that you were there as an assembly member, I was really interested and spoke, of course, to other people there, not you, to set up you being able to find time to be on our show today. And I just want to reintroduce you and remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at nccradio.com or on any podcast venue of your choice. And for more information about today's guest or topic, email us at whpc@ncc.edu or me directly at naturalnurse.com. And our guest today is Dr. Anna Kelles, who is an Assembly member, New York Assembly, the 125th District, which is an absolutely beautiful place. So you have been very active, of course, as you always are. Let's talk about some of the things that I know you've been involved with, like what is cryptocurrency legislation?
That's a great question. I'm going to try and give you as succinct an answer as possible. Cryptocurrency it's a digital asset. So instead of being like a dollar that you have in your hand, these are currencies that are completely digital. I try to explain it to people because most people are familiar with the banking system where you go to a bank, you put money in, you take money out, you have an account. If you put a really big check in, for example, it's multiple thousands of dollars, you won't have access to all of that money for a little bit until they validate that the money is in the account of the person who wrote you the check, for example. So the banks are doing the validating of the transaction itself. In cryptocurrencies, they are exchanged in an online platform, but they need to be validated. So there are different techniques to validate cryptocurrencies. And that's actually what is really important, because cryptocurrencies, unlike a banking system, they are decentralized. There is no overarching entity that is regulating or monitoring. So in a cryptocurrency, there is a ledger, and every interaction is posted on this public ledger. And the exchanges are happening and the data is happening all on computers throughout the world, right? So That is very complicated for people to understand, but this is the most important piece, which is that transactions need to be validated, and that everyone understands. And there are multiple forms of validating transactions. One of them, the most well-known one, or one of the most well-known one, is called proof of work. There's another called proof of stake. Proof of work is very important because the transactions, when the transactions happen and they need to be validated, the mechanism called proof of work means that for all of the blocks of transactions that are incorporated into a block, there is a random mathematical equation that is assigned to that block. And people compete with each other to answer that mathematical equation. It's a very complicated mathematical equation. That's what's really important, is that people are competing with each other to answer that mathematical equation. Whoever answers it first wins currency for their effort and simultaneously validates those transactions. The technology that cryptocurrency is built on is called blockchain technology, and that's why I referred to it as a block. So you will have a block of transactions. They're all put together in a block. When that block is validated, it is confirmed. When new transactions happen with that same money, that creates a new block. But that new block has a unique identifier. Each one of the blocks has unique identifiers, like a VIN number on a car, right? That unique identifier not only uniquely identifies that block, but inside the code says what block it came from. So that's what creates the blockchain. When anybody tries to hack any of those blocks, or if a validation fails, it will create a break in the entire blockchain. And that's what creates the security, because they're all connected and they are all publicly documented in this ledger. So that is kind of as simply as I can describe it.
Not that simple, but why? Talk a little bit more, too, about why would that need legislation?
Well, so this is what's so important, is that that mechanism of competing to validate that transaction requires a tremendous amount of energy. Why? Because the equation is actually a complex sequence of random digits. And so the only way that you can gain an edge over someone else who's trying to answer that equation as well, quote unquote equation as well, is to have more computers randomly crunching numbers and digits. That will give you an edge. So if you have two computers and I only have one, then you have twice as much of a chance of answering, quote unquote, that equation than I do. So what that's led to is businesses being built, corporations being built that house thousands upon thousands upon thousands of computers, sometimes 100,000 computer processors, all running 24/7 as fast as possible, randomly crunching numbers to try and capture that equation, because then they will win coin. And as long as the value of that coin is greater than the cost of the electricity, then they will make a profit. So they're simultaneously always looking for the cheapest form of energy. And what happened here locally is that a company actually purchased their own power plant and started running a massive operation inside the power plant, using the energy produced by the power plant to fuel the running of all of those computers. The way that they were cooling that system is by pulling in, because it was on Seneca Lake, pulling in, and they still are, by the way, pulling in up to 130 million gallons of water a day.
Wow.
Heating it up from about 40 to 60 degrees temperature up to the permitted 108 degrees temperature, and then releasing that into a Class C trout stream. Now, trout show signs of stress and start to die off after about 70 degrees temperature.
Right, they don't like it warm, true.
So a huge decimation of that ecosystem. right? So not only were they producing a huge amount of energy, using it and releasing massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, but also causing heating up of this water, affecting that ecosystem, and then that water is going into the lake, which has had significant increases in harmful algal bloom outbreaks, and increases in temperature are one of the causes of increases in harmful algal bloom outbreaks, which are toxic to animals, including humans. So you can see it has, although it sounds like this ephemeral, online thing, it's not even real physical currency. These operations that have sprung up have massive, massive impacts on the environment.
So that's so interesting, Anna, because I did see a special about that on 60 Minutes, which was the first time that I really was not in touch with the fact that something like cryptocurrency and Bitcoin could be so environmentally destructive.
Right. Well, and you could see actually the impact, because one of the main currencies, Ethereum, last year switched. It was last year, the year before. Time goes by so fast at this point. Switched from proof of work to proof of stake. And proof of stake is also a form of validation, but uses less than 0.5 the amount of energy that proof of work uses. And although some people will try and say that it is not as secure, that it isn't as democratic, in theory, that could be true because of the way it's designed. But in practice, that has not been borne out. It has been shown to be as secure and as democratic. And that last piece is really important, because people will say cryptocurrencies are the wave of the future because fiat currencies from governments have been completely consolidated by the 0.1% wealthiest people and are no longer in circulation, which is absolutely true. That is the draw for cryptocurrencies, because they're decentralized. They can't be owned by, regulated by. They are in their own universe. But because of the way proof of work works, Bitcoin, which is the predominant cryptocurrency, the first cryptocurrency based on proof of work, 21% of the currency is owned by 0.1% of the accounts. It is one of the most consolidated currencies that exist on the planet. So in actuality, it is not distributed very well. It's actually quite consolidated, just like all the other currencies, but even more so among the wealthiest people. So there are significant problems. There are environmental problems. And I wrote a piece of legislation that put a moratorium, a pause on the purchasing of power plants in New York State, because there are about 30 retired power plants in upstate New York and an additional 19 power plants in downstate New York that are all retired, that were available for purchase and to turn back on and become cryptocurrency corporate, mining centers. And because we have such strong environmental regulations and laws here in New York State, my concern is that this would undo and prevent us from being able to reach our climate goals.
So that's probably why a lot of them have moved to Nevada and other places where there's less regulation.
Well, no, we still have some of the biggest cryptocurrency mine corporations in New York State. It was a pause. It wasn't retroactive. So the ones that already exist here can continue while we have this 2-year moratorium. But part of the legislation was also the requirement that the Department of Environmental Conservation do a comprehensive 2-year environmental impact statement evaluating the entire industry and its impact on our ability to reach our climate goals. Once that study is complete, we will use that information to evaluate whether or not, of course, we need to do regulations that are permanent, which, given the evidence that we've already seen globally, I suspect that we will. So has it affected whether cryptocurrency miners are here? Or has it been the fact that the cryptocurrency markets have completely crashed over the last year? I can't say, which they have significantly. There is some rebound that we're starting to see. So it's still an issue. It's still a problem. It's something that we need to address. So huge environmental issue, that was the legislation.
Right. It's what I think is so big is that someone like yourself, who not only is environmentally minded, but actually has a scientific grasp of a wide range of environmental issues, was there, because who else would have ever brought this up?
Yeah, I don't think it would have been that. So, as an environmentalist, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that I was, but I did not do it alone. I had a huge number of environmentalists that I worked with. It was a massive team effort. And by the end, every single statewide environmental organization and advocacy group had joined the fight to get this bill through, and we got it through in 2 years, in 2 sessions. So quite a feat. I'm very proud of that effort, and we'll see what comes next once the data comes out. But certainly one of many of the environmental issues that I'm working on right now.
Well, what a vast array of things you're working on, and thank you so much for being there and helping New York State. You have the PFAS Disclosure Act going. We're not going to have time to go into that whole thing, but just tell us what the PFAS is for our listeners.
Right. So PFAS, otherwise known as a forever chemical, is everywhere. Almost every human body at this point causes many issues: endocrine disruption, cancer, many, many issues, chronic disease. And this bill would require that any dumping that is happening into our water in New York State has to be disclosed. That's the first step, is to find out where it is and how much. And then, of course, we can use that data to regulate. And that's the first step. And then there's, the other, which is totally different direction, which is the Sustainability and Social Accountability Fashion Act, which will be one of the first regulations in the world of an industry that is responsible for almost 10% of all the greenhouse gas emissions on the planet, and some of the highest amount of slave labor and child labor on the planet. So many different directions in the environmental sphere.
And at least you're there to bring up, these things consciously and have the facts and figures behind you. So I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, Dr. Anna Kelles, Ph.D., Assembly Member of New York's 125th District.
Thank you for covering these topics. They're so important and near and dear to my heart.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.